Welcome to the Data First Podcast, the podcast where we dive deep into cutting-edge research on physical, mental, and spiritual health. From psychedelics and new medical techniques to nutrition and religion, we explore how these topics impact well-being and resilience. Join us as we break down and analyze important research studies driving decision-making and optimal performance and holistic health.
How was your leadership in 82nd?
Really different.
You talking about Grenada?
Grenada, yeah.
Yeah, so a little bit background on Al. He served in the U.S. Army Special Forces and achieved the rank of Master Sergeant, retired in 2006 and did some government work contract and is currently starting a new enterprise in Army Special Forces training and was stationed in Germany with the 10th Special Forces Group from 89 to 1994.
Yeah, so 88% after one treatment, 97% after two. We got bumped up and we ended up being like the first guys. We had 70 days just for currency. We had 70 days of training they had to fulfill every year.
Can you walk us through kind of what it's like to be in a study like this? So you get flown out to...
My cohort was supposed to be 4 people.
Wow. You know, Johns Hopkins for psilocybin, they have a playlist of music. Well, if you had somebody standing over you and saying, hey, remember this thing?
Non-disruptive music or anti-music or whatever you want to call it.
So welcome to the Data First Podcast. We're back today with a guest and super excited to talk to Al Mullen. He was a participant in the Stanford study, but before we get started with that, just a couple of housekeeping things. None of the views expressed here are related to the Veterans Administration, DOD, or any of the private entities that any of us are affiliated with. But we're also joined by Chris Klaftenegger, who you've heard before. Morning, Chris.
Morning, guys.
Yeah. So what we're doing, so that Stanford ran a study, the magnesium Ibogaine therapy in veterans with traumatic brain injuries with 30 participants. And we were lucky enough to get one of the participants to say yes to coming on the podcast to give us an inside view as to what it's like to be in one of these studies, and particularly this one, which was recently referenced in a Joe Rogan podcast where the governor of Texas and another individual were on there doing a great job describing a lot of these things, but they weren't in it. They didn't participate in it. Al, you did. So good morning. So thanks for being here.
No problem. My pleasure.
Yeah. So a little bit background on Al. He served in the U.S. Army Special Forces and achieved the rank of Master Sergeant, retired in 2006 and did some government work contract and is currently starting a new enterprise. It's pretty cool. He's taken, I have one of these things and they're amazing. Diver down audio. He takes speakers and puts them in a Pelican case and it's all G'd up. The batteries last forever. And it's pretty cool. And he resides in Woodland Park up in Colorado at like 9,000 feet, kind of off the beaten path. I was born in California, raised in rural Alaska, spent 4 years as infantry paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He then spent 2 years in Army Special Forces training and was stationed in Germany with the 10th Special Forces Group from 89 to 1994. He was trained as combat diver and medic, along with many other specialties. He went to work at the U.S. Army JFK Special Warfare Center, Fort Bragg, for 4 years, training Special Forces candidates from 1998 until his retirement in 2006. He returned to operational duty with 10th Special Forces Group at Fort Carson, Colorado. He served on many overseas deployments, including Grenada, Bosnia, Kosovo, and Iraq, to name just a few. And then he earned a combat infantry badge, second award, not too many of those floating around. And then Bronze Star, Master Parachutist badge, Special Forces Combat Diver, Supervisor badge, Special Forces tab, Meritorious Service Medal, and 12 other commendation and achievement medals along the way. So he has, just a tremendous, we were talking a little bit last night, and just a tremendous career, a lot of interesting stuff. I'm sure it'll pop up throughout. And, with that kind of background, it's like, well, of course you have a TBI in there somewhere. Of course you do. Kind of like we were learning about when we were going through other studies, 85% of veterans soft veterans have a TBI just in training and having.
And I think, I didn't have any documented TBI. Like I was never ambushed or anything in a vehicle, like a typical VBED thing, or, IED while you're driving down a road. It's like a typical mechanism of injury. But for me, I think that it's all, training stuff. So plenty of instances of, overpressure incidents. Did a lot of counter-terrorist training, which you do breaching training. So you're standing right next to pretty significant charges going off. And that's a pretty common place where you blow open a door or make an entryway into someplace, and you're standing right next to it because you want to get in as soon as the opening is created and use the explosion for dynamic effect. And so sometimes you're standing a little too close to it. Includes like, some of the training stuff I've set off claymores at arm's length, just around a structure. So you're definitely, all of that stuff is just coming down and affecting you. So yeah, absolutely. So there you go.
And you heard him right, at an arm's length. So in your training scenario, what was your goal of setting up a claymore within arm's length?
Well, it's kind of like practicing for like worst case scenarios. So we did a couple of different variations of that. So like you hear like people breaking contact drills.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the guys in the stack, the first guy, he's making contact with the enemy, and then he's peeling back. So that guy that's there in the stack be setting that up. So when everybody peels past him, then he can run and set it off. So it's one of those type scenario. Like,
gotcha.
Yeah.
Did you see stars as the VA last you?
Yeah, I mean, it's just kind of like a hurricane going on you. So I mean, when you set it off and you're like that close, like literally to save your ears, you just, even though you have hearing protection on, you're screaming.
Yeah.
And then so it kind of abates that overpressure from your leaf blowing out your ears anyways.
Interesting. Did you get anything out of reading the Ibogaine study? Did anything pop out for you?
Let me jump over to it real quick. Yeah, I had a few notes on it. The main thing of the percentages, the most impactful thing I think is the outcome. 88% complete recovery after one treatment, 97% after two retreats with the Ibogaine set of administration. That's the most impactful thing to me, is like the proof's in the pudding. Even after 6 months to a year, they're still recording that the symptoms have significantly decreased from what they had going in, and that includes the rate of addiction, any of the substances or any stuff that they were doing before, and the behavioral. Repaired marriages, repaired relationships, repaired the relationship with the operator themselves too. And we'll let you speak to that from your own experience, but. Yeah, that was the most impactful thing I noticed. There's a lot of stuff in there that's interesting, but the most impactful is what came out of it.
Yeah. So 20 years. If we get back up, kind of like you grew up in Alaska, so you're not another atypical Alism. You grew up in a place a lot of people don't have that kind of experience growing up so rural. Like, what was that kind of? How'd you get there, and what was your childhood like?
So we had been traveling around a bit, and it seemed like we moved up to Alaska from California when I was 8 years old first, and then things didn't work out very well. We only stayed there for a year, and we moved back down to Michigan to kind of regroup, and with the intent on going back there. And so I have a brother and a sister, and so it was our family of five. We're in Michigan for a couple of years, and then we regrouped and went back up to Alaska with a better plan. And so we went up there and then built a house, pretty remote, 2-story log cabin. So fully remote. This is outside of Palmer, up in the mountains. And this would be like the Wolverine Lake and Wolverine Road area at the end of Wolverine Road. At that time, it was the end of the road. So very remote. And we were, less than rich, let's put it that way. That's a really nice way to put it. So it was a very different experience. A lot of subsistence stuff, things that people take for granted, like electricity, phone, and access to groceries, all that kind of stuff.
So when you went to SEER, it was like being back at home kind of thing?
Well, no relation to that, but my SEER experience was kind of a little bit different, but sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So you're in Alaska. Is that where you joined the military from?
It is. Yeah. So I signed up for, I was ready to go. I was ready to get out of Alaska at that point. And so I signed up for it in my senior year. So probably like the middle of my senior year, I was like finalizing stuff. So I talked to the Navy recruiter. I didn't even have a conversation with the Marine recruiter at all, or the Air Force recruiter, but I talked to the Navy recruiter and I talked to the Army recruiter. So the Navy recruiter, I talked to him about joining SEALs, and at that time they weren't doing anything. They weren't given a guaranteed buds contract, and they said that you could join, but there's no guarantee on it. The Army had a deal where you could go into SF, and it didn't work out for me. I couldn't get an SF contract, but I did. And the guy was straight with me. He said that I could go to the 82nd Airborne Division, which is at Fort Bragg, and you could go there. And the recruiter for SF is right there, just down the street. And it was like, there's a lot of people that do it that way, and you could do it that way. And I did. but took a little bit of a circuitous path to get there. But I did go into the 82nd for 4 years, and that was, kind of led me to the decision to go SF. But
How was your leadership in 82nd?
really different. So my first battalion commander was Bill Garrison. He's the Somalia gag guy fame. So he was a Corvette driving cigar chomping character, and we were like DRF nothing, which means that, there's 9 rifle battalions there, and we weren't in the queue to be deployed like DRF 1. They assign your battalion a number, DRF 1 through 9. And we were like DRF 7 or 8 or something like that. But because it was Bill Garrison, we got bumped up, and we ended up being like the first guys to land right behind the Rangers jumping in. As soon as they pushed off the landing zone, I was either the first or the second plane that landed.
You shot on Grenada?
Grenada, yeah. And because of that. So talking about leadership, so
Yeah.
That from there, so battalion commander, our sergeant major was from Ranger Battalion. My first sergeant was like the most decorated guy in 82nd Airborne Division, Patrick Tadina, had gazillion silver stars and bronze stars, and spent 6 years in country in a letter ranger company.
Now, so in Vietnam, you spent 6 years just living there.
Yes. While in mission, continuous.
And so this is your first leader in the U.S. Army in the 82nd, had spent 6 years continuous in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Well, I'd say you lucked out.
And then like one of my company commanders was an SF captain that was doing some conventional time. At that time, it was just prior. It was right at the time that they formed a branch. So they were still coming back to conventional forces. So he went over to the 82nd to do his time, and it ended up being a good deal for us because we had teams that would come out to do conventional unit training while I was there. And then had another guy who was an enlisted guy that was in my platoon for a while that was SF. So, yeah.
Yeah, you think
Just all those people had an influence on it, those 4 mainly.
on the rest of your 20 years, you think?
Yeah, but I mean, that's what started me to go into the door to SF, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. So what does that take us to? Like what year, 4 years? When did you join?
I joined in 82, and then I was there for 4 years. So I got out in 86. So I decided I had a buddy of mine that got out ahead of me, and he was living down in Fort Lauderdale, and he convinced me. He said, "Hey, yeah, you can join. There's 11th and 20th group down here. You can come down here and go to college." So I went down there and I checked it out. I did. I went down, ended up in the 11th group for a little while, started the Q course, and things changed for me. And I ended up going over to 20th group, and I was in C Company, 3rd Battalion, 20th group in Fort Lauderdale for a bit. I graduated Q course, and then probably about 6 months after that, I was trying to make something work. And it's really hard to make things work as a guard guy because of the requirements for SF are just so much more than just your, 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year. It's, you're doing at least double that. And you have to have a job that accommodates that. And it was just hard for me to fit in with a job. And I was just trying to find something and make it work. And I couldn't make it work. And one of the guys at the unit was helping me out and getting me a lot of extra weekends. I'd go up to Camp Landing for other units and stuff and help out. It wasn't my team, but it was like other units, and just be there because I was an 18 Delta, fill in a lot of spaces. So, and I did that for a while, and I ended up finally, I just said I made a decision. I talked to one guy that had been in 10th group, and that was at the unit. I said, yeah, I mean, I think that's what I'm going to do. So I went and talked to the recruiter, and at first they were like, well, if you're going to come back on active duty because you've been out for a couple of years, even though you're in the guard, they'll probably knock you down a couple of ranks and you'll have to get retrained and reassigned needs of the Army. I was like, no. I was like, I'll for sure go back in at least as a butt sergeant, Sergeant E5, and I'm going to get an assignment to Bob Toltz, and I'll be as an 18 Delta. I will be retrained, and I'm going to get a bonus. And he was just, the recruiter just laughed at me, and he'd been a recruiter for a while, and he'd never had any experience with any SF guys. He had plenty of experience with prior service guys, and so he thought that he knew the path. And then sure enough, when they had my assignment ready, they told me to come back down to the Met station in Miami, and I was down there talking to him, and he said, we got to call up DA. So there's a Special Forces major and sergeant major that worked in assignments up there. And the major that worked up there wanted to talk to me, asked me what my deal was. And he said, okay, so we can find a spot for you over in Bad Tulsa. He goes, it's kind of a little bit out of the norm, but yeah, absolutely. We'll find you a spot. Goes, let me talk to that recruiter. So the recruiter took the phone back, talked to him for a bit, and got red the way it is. And he put it down and he said, and I ain't never seen anything like that happen ever, so he was like quite shocked. It was out of the norm.
It just seems crazy that you think like we're gonna retrain you.
Yeah, F them all that train. It's like, joke, dude. And so this goes back to, the whole thing about being a National Guard guy in SF. It's like, you got to take off for training. Like I was gone for a year and a half, so like, well, it was 2 years. And it's like, you have to have a job that accommodates that. So I was working cutting meat in a grocery store, and I go back to the grocery store and they're like, who are you? And sorry.
Yeah, and that probably made you Sarah. I wonder, was you Sarah even a thing back then? The protections for your job?
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can't, like that isn't the way to go. It's like keep your job by litigation. Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Not at all.
So it definitely works with federal agencies and for cops and firefighters and stuff. That's what I see.
And owing to that, I think that, the majority of the unit, like I was in Charlie Company 30th to 20th at the time, and I think that I don't have the stats on it, but I'm just going to say that, like, anecdotally, probably at least half of those guys were like firefighters. They had government jobs that could accommodate, and it was like they do shift work, and it was like pretty easy to plug and play and say, hey, I'm going to go here and do that. And they're like, okay, and it kind of supports their job, especially like a guy's at 18 Delta and he's a firefighter paramedic. I mean, he's getting top-notch medical training, on top of stuff and all that kind of stuff. The training that's available to you, that's is, second to none, I think. So.
Yeah, Chris was a guard PJ, so he felt the same. It sounds like for the PJs, it's a similar deal. I mean, it's a long training pipeline. The requirements for you guys, you're doing SAR missions though, like in the States, right? You guys are like flying out in the ocean a lot.
Yeah, the guard teams have quite a few. I mean, between us, the Alaska team, the Reserve Florida team, and the New York team, like the overwater missions were pretty relatively frequent for us. Probably one average every quarter, and sometimes it was more. So jump missions over water to pull somebody off something. A fisherman that got sick or got hit with a huge tuna or had a heart attack or we had a couple of burn cases and stuff. So we'd have to jump out. The two that I did were both over longer than 1,500 miles out off the coast of Costa Rica.
So you were already on a status. They flew you from Northern California down.
Yeah, we jumped on a C-130, either one of ours or the Coast Guard, and we'd go down to not Costa Rica, Cozumel.
Oh, down Mexico?
Yeah, down in Mexico. We'd fly to Cozumel, refuel, and then we'd fly out, and then the 60s would come out. They'd puddle jump to us, and they'd wait in Cozumel, which is pretty cool for them, until we got whatever vessel we were going to come back on. We got within 6-hour flight on the ship. They'd come pull us off and fly us back and drop the patient off. Usually it was like a 3-day mission, 72 to 96 hours with the patient out there.
As a National Guardsman. So how?
As a Guardsman, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not unique to SF either. It's like all these soft units trying to balance life and the mission requirements.
I was lucky enough to be on full-time status. I was a AGR.
Okay.
But all of our traditionals, like Al said, we had 70 days of, just for currency, we had 70 days of training they had to fulfill every year. So that far exceeds what the traditional Guard commitment is.
That's just for currency. And for anybody out there that doesn't know what that means, it's like making sure your paramedic license and all your other stuff. And for you guys, the flight duty status stuff, I'm sure had requirements and everything else. Yeah.
That's just on a sidebar. I worked with the Air Force Reserve PJs down in Homestead. I went through a course down there for a couple of weeks with those guys. I was the only Army guy on the course.
What were you doing down there?
Well, technically it was the Air Force Pararescue Weapons Tactics course. It was part of their reserve, qualification thing that they were doing. And that was,
that's cool.
Like the ground rescue part of things.
Yeah. Well, you were doing, we're kind of jumping ahead in the timeline, but you were doing that, at least you were talking about last night. You did 6 months of like a SAR mission.
Oh yeah. I mean, a couple of times we did CSAR stuff. So,
yeah.
So, the first one was the 37 parallel no fly zone enforcement. So you do CSAR out of Insulet.
Mm-hmm.
And that was at 110. And so that was in conjunction with the PJs, the Special Operations Squadron is the lead on the CSAR stuff. And then we're just augmenting. So we're just gunslingers for the ground rescue part of that, if that came to be.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's all super interwoven. I think it's something from the outside looking in, you don't necessarily realize how interwoven all these different job titles really are.
Yeah, and then the second time, I mean, I don't know if you want to go over that in timeline, but I did that again, and from San Vito, Italy, we launched, and we would go on the Adriatic and be in orbit anytime any NATO planes were flying over Yugoslavia or the former Yugoslavia.
Yeah.
So on standby for anything that happened there. So they would, pull you up in a helicopter, and it was like the helicopters that we were using then were the HH-53s, and have a refueling probe on it, so they could park behind an HC-130, which is a tanker version of a C-130, and it pulls out those refueling lines, and then they fly the chopper into the badminton nose of it and refuel. Looks like a magnetic coupling and refuel in flight, so you can stay up there for hours.
Yeah. So you're flying this potential CSAR mission, maybe, hopefully not. But what are you doing? Because let's go back. What year is this? We're kind of getting off the timeline here, but this is pretty interesting.
That one was 93.
So this is before iPods, and you had like a tape deck. Like, what are you doing in the plane for the helicopter for hours and hours?
Yeah, I mean, if you're lucky, if you had some, foresight to it, you probably had a paperback, that you could pull out or something like that, This was, so at that time, this was like the first GPSs were coming about. And I remember, like, we had a Trimble trim pack, and this thing was like gigantic. It was like, to have that thing, like, to manually program that thing with all the waypoints in it and all this stuff. And so we had like 113. Well, it's like the only device. Now GPS is so powerful. It's like they're super tiny, like every, size of the wristwatch on up.
Yeah. So sorry to jump off the trail there. So we were, where were we when we jumped off the trail getting into the CSAR stuff?
Just got to 10th group.
Just got to 10th.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah. So how was that going from National Guard to active duty? What are some of the major differences, you think? What was the...
Well, I mean, like, daily purpose. It's like you're not a mixed purpose. Like, I'm not going in doing your job, whatever it is, like you drive a truck, being a cop or a firefighter or whatever it is that you have for your daily job. You're not doing anything like that, and with SF, your mission focuses, and you're never doing the same thing, or rarely are you just repeating things. And so it's always something different.
So you spent, and then so you went to Grenada, and then fast forward, you had mentioned a couple of deployments here. Was the next one to Bosnia as an SF guy?
No, I think the next deployment was the Gulf War, so 91. So that was prior to Bosnia. So we went up into northern Iraq, and we were running like a Kurdish refugee camp up there. That's what we did. So it wasn't any like gunslinging operations. This was more, humanitarian assistance stuff.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then how was that in the refugee camp?
That was pretty wild, because we set up a company which was 6 operational detachments, and every detachment had a little bit different area of focus. So one detachment is working with, we had some Swedes there that were running a water filtration plant for them, like out of the river that was there. It was the river valley that applied for oil from Turkey and Iraq. So the cranes were on both sides, mostly on the Iraqi side. And we had another team that was working with the German Red Cross. They had a full-on regular tent hospital set up there. There was another team that was working with a Japanese team from Doctors Without Borders. And my team was working for an Austrian organization that was called Arbeiters Bund, which is kind of like a Red Cross thing, but it was more like the English translation of it, called the Maltesers. So they had set up, their emphasis was neonate, right? Some of the stuff you see that it's like really tragic. It's just makes you glad to be living in a ship. It's just the morbidity and mortality. Like I said, the stuff that we were doing there ain't anything from doing any kind of first aid for anything that came there, but we had a clinic set up for neonates. We would do immunizations. I would list everybody in the for that, learn how to give an injection, and go through give an injection, oral polio vaccine, and then kids would come in that were really sick, and they would be like a few months old, and this way out, they'd be so dehydrated they couldn't start an ID on them. It would like completely clean their belly with iodine and do this inject under your skin with like rules of sodium chloride with salt solution, and put the wheels under there, and then the steel iodine, and then until they could get rehydrated, they could start a scalping IV, which is typical for I think at that time. So yeah.
So how many kids are you seeing a day?
Quite a few. I mean, I don't, yeah, but like tons, yeah.
Yeah. That sounds very difficult. And you use the word tragic. I don't know if it's even a strong enough word. Having to hydrate children under the skin and then their moms. Just the whole situation sounds absolutely just tragic. So yeah.
That's what we do with dogs.
Yeah. Yeah.
To hydrate them, yeah. Put it under the back of their neck and their skin.
Yeah.
Same.
Yeah. So
but it's, I mean, to me, it was trying to like think, to enact that kind of logic into what you want to do. The mechanism of action. That's really,
yeah. Okay. So, and then you have the training as an 18 Delta. You said the other teammates are getting involved. Are they in the tent with you with all the babies?
Oh, completely. Like you overwhelmed with stuff, and you did a lot of, see one, do one, teach one. It was absolute, like, yeah. So I had the guy who was a fellow guy on my team, like, swabbing bellies and doing, the sodium chloride field infiltration like that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So cross training came in handy. How many are we talking? Like 100 people that you're working with? 1,000, 10,000? Like how big of a situation is this?
Well, numbers. I mean, there's only, I think there are like 70 SF guys in our company, right? Like it's not that many guys, but probably 8 workers that were there, like probably double our number, so probably 150 and that was from all these different organizations. And then currently out that very quite a bit. Anyway, for I think in that valley probably anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000. I don't know the numbers, so yeah, I'm just gonna guess.
Yes.
I'm gonna say 6,000.
Yeah, but that's not the population you guys were assisting. Was this somewhere between 6,000 to 10,000 people?
Yeah,
with a couple hundred. You guys, interesting. Well, I mean, you're lucky to have you there, no doubt. So that was your first tour as an SF guy outside the U.S. in an
absolute
hostile combat type zone.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think, like, how did you, coming out of the end of that, when you were done with the mission, do you feel like you were successful as an 18 Delta? You were able to do your job. You were trained well. You felt like you had the skills necessary for that mission?
Absolutely, because that's what 18 Deltas are based on. It's like, doing that stuff in an austere environment. So that's 100%. So that validated everything right there. Yeah.
I don't know too many training courses that you could take somebody start to finish, put them in another hostile environment with babies that are on their way out, having to do those kinds of techniques to get hydrated.
So it wasn't just, reacting to like emergency stuff and doing trauma stuff. That's, I mean, I think that everybody, rendered DJs, everybody that's medics, could do that now. So this was more like, clinical medicine stuff, with a lot. And kind of, in some ways, smart beds in around homes, like making things work for the environment. Yeah. There's people that do stuff. So,
yeah. So you had that pump, and then we fast forward. When's the next significant event for you when you're touring?
Well, I mean, there was a whole bunch of like fit and training events and stuff. I don't know if all that significant, but I would say like probably significant thing on the timeline when Yugoslavia blew up. That was 93. So
93.
Yeah.
What happened there?
So when that blew up, and all those different factions. So I mean, basically it was NATO wanting to intervene there, and they're intervening with UN troops and with air. So they deployed us. They got the best use of us. But my company was to go support CSAR, the combat search and rescue aspect of it, to keep all of the primarily U.S. but all the NATO pilots that were flying missions over the former Yugoslavia. So that's Croatia, Bosnia, Macedonia, and all those places that they were flying. Serbia, all those places that are now all separate countries, but it was all under one banner at that time, Yugoslavia. But so that's where we were flying. We spent 6 months there supporting the CSAR mission.
Okay.
And so we got somebody else in there. That's pretty long for an SF team to deploy like that. And I think that because that was the beginning of the war and they didn't have anybody ramped up to be our replacements yet, So,
And that's what we were talking about earlier, where you were in the HH-53s,
yeah,
doing laps essentially. Okay. And so then, and in our discussion, I thought this was, I'd never met anybody that this happened to, but Invasion 2003. So now we fast forward all the way.
Oh yeah. Okay.
We fast forward all the way to, we're getting ready to go into Iraq, and there's Al Mullen getting ready with his team to go in. I think.
Okay. So a lot of things happened, in between then. So they kind of have to fill the blanks there. So I had been promoted to master sergeant and I was an E8. And that's the senior guy in an operational detachment, 12-person detachment. My detachment was a dive detachment, and we were part of 2nd Battalion. And so we went in like the northwestern sector from like Mosul, north of Mosul, but like Dohuk area was the area that we were in first. And so to get into the country at that time, Turkey wasn't letting any airplanes fly over there, even though that we had a base there, but they wouldn't allow anything to support anything that was going on with the Iraqi conflict in 2003. So the planes that were in Isilik couldn't come down there or anything like that. So that created a problem about how to get us in there. So some of the guys, like, the first few guys that went in there probably, got in on some covert, I'm not going to go into that, but there were a few guys that were already there. And then the majority of the SF guys from 2nd and 3rd Battalion and 10th Group came in by air infill. So there was a sortie of C-130s, and their plan was to stage out of Romania and go down to Jordan and then fly along the border over from as much far as you could up through Jordan, because Jordan was friendly to us. And before he got into Syria, Syria was not allowing any overflights. And then you'd be into Iraq, and then kind of scoot around the northern end of Iraq and then up into those areas that the Kurds had control of. They did this where the C-130s were like an hour apart, and they're kind of flying pretty much the same route. And I was in the last plane. That plane, by the time we got there, there'd been 4 other planes that flew the same route ahead of us. So they had all their guns zeroed and had all their, all the bugs worked out on their ADA. So by the time that we flew over, I was sitting on a C-130 on my rucksack in between the rear jump doors. And the jump doors on a MC-130 are quite large. They're not like a little portal. They're pretty good size. They're like a foot wide and 2 feet tall or something like that. But they're not just a little tiny portal. They're big. And I'm sitting on my rucksack in between those 2 jump doors, and that plane started juking all over the place. First, I was hearing noises, and I just thought, oh, okay, that sounds like chaff and flare dispensers going off or something. And then the plane starts juking all over the place. So like he's, doing movements and going up and down and left and right. And I'm looking out the window, and I remember looking out the left window jump door, and it looked like fireworks are coming out of the plane. I mean, you could see just tracers from all over the place. One of the guys on my team were by the ramp. He had been laying down on the ramp. He'd been laying there with his arms back like that. Whenever the plane started juking and moving around, he sits up, and something falls on his head, and it was just like a little puff of something, and he like looks up, and it was like a piece of the insulation that they have in the interior of the plane. And then dawns on him about like, well, that piece of insulation didn't just fall down on her cellar. It was like a bullet went through the skin of the plane, and it turns out that the bullet went through right where his head was if he'd been laying down, if he didn't sit up. And so that airframe got so it took out one engine, and it took out one of the other engine's propeller. So they had to shut that down because it went out of balance. So a C-130 had 4 engines and it's flying on 2, and it full of holes in the wings and the gas tanks. And it shattered the windshield, and it destroyed the FLIR, the forward-looking infrared radar that they use on a screen so they can, follow the terrain and fly really low. So he's got half the windshield is just spiderwebbed, and the FLIR is out, and it's got 2 engines. So he made just yank it up north and run across the border, because we're like pretty close to the mountains, because that's what they were trying to do, is fly along the border. So even though Turkey wasn't allowing any air flights, they went over there to Turkey and glided it into Israel. We got off, and we had an SF guy that was there as a liaison, one guy, an E8 that was there, actually a good friend of mine, but he was there. He got us a C-17 warmed up, and we offloaded all of our stuff. That C-130 was full of Javelin missiles and 81 millimeter mortar rounds, a pallet of money, and AT-4s and all kinds of stuff that weren't in the shipping containers. Just everything. Like you're going to war. It's like, and got all that stuff onto the C-17, and they flew us out to Ramstein. And funny thing, like they tried to get us back in the queue, get us another plane. The Air Mobility Command wouldn't let us take any of our equipment on there because it wasn't in shipping containers, because it was not combat, whatever the different commands were in the Air Force. I'm not familiar with the thing, but it was like, I know that one was like Air Mobility Command, the other one is something like Tactical Mobility or Special Operations Squad or whatever they fall under. It's not Air Mobility, but the Air Mobility guys were just, complete, well, we're going to stick by the regs and that stuff. You can bring that missile on here, but it's got to be in the shipping container. It's not in the shipping container. So we left one person there, the company sergeant major, actually, with all the stuff and another guy. And then they recycled everybody without the Izu weapons that we were carrying, and got back into the queue. So
when you flew it again, did you guys get shot up again?
no. So the second time they finally got permission to overfly Turkey, and we just went that direct route. So no fire at all.
Yeah, well, that would have been nice if you could just done that the first time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
And so timeline wise, so this is like pre-invasion. So there isn't, there's no conflict going on yet, or any declared conflict yet. So we're up there and training Kurds. We're training, they have an established militia because of the way that things had gone with like enforcing the no-fly zone. So they had pretty much a autonomous zone up there in the northern part of the country, up by Duhok and all those points north of Mosul, throughout the entire country from east to west. So there's like a zone up there. So we trained some guys, so Kurdish commandos. So I'm like one of the few teams that actually did unconventional warfare, I guess, technically. Because after that, then, things changed by definition. So it's no longer unconventional warfare because now they're part of the actual governmental force. So now you're doing, like foreign internal defense or, some counterinsurgency or whatever you want to call it, but a slightly different focus. So at that point, the Kurds were part of the insurgency, and that's what we were doing. So this is, the absolute full spectrum SF mission.
Yeah. From getting shot down to doing UW to FID, counterinsurgency.
Yeah.
You just checked a lot of boxes on the list of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So then, how much longer, since 2003, how much longer were you in the service? I'm sure you had a number of deployments within that, at least, probably. Do you have another one after that?
Oh yeah. So, I went to Kosovo like right after that. And then I had another deployment where I can't talk a whole bunch about it, but I went back to Bosnia as part of a kind of below the radar task force that was there. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And that leads you towards your getting out and making that decision.
Yeah, because technically on that task force, I was the senior enlisted advisor, or, in the Army, we call it like sergeant major, but it was a joint task force. So it was called the senior enlisted advisor. So you're the senior enlisted guy that's there. So functionally, you're the sergeant major, and it was like a 150 person task force, and you deal with a lot of different things. And so that gave me some insight as to what the job would be when I got promoted, because technically they were kind of frocking me for that position, even though it's coded like an E8 or 9 position. So I was a very senior E8, and I was relieved by an E9. So it could be filled by an E8 or an E9. It's just you had to be an SF guy, E8 or E9 with a TS clearance was the experience and background that they were looking for.
Gotcha. And then what kind of drove you to punch out?
Well, yeah, I guess that was kind of a convoluted way of saying that. So I was able to put the shoes on and try it out for a while.
Oh, I see.
So, and I was just thinking to myself that my future at this point in time was probably better for me to go a different route. And after, at some point, everybody says, they've had enough. And it was a difficult decision for me because I had orders for the Sergeant Major Academy and everything. And I had to say, thank you, I'm honored, but here's my retirement paperwork. So that was, so it was not an easy decision at all. And it took a long time for me to get there. It wasn't something I did like overnight. It was a lot of pondering.
Yeah. Do you think like just over these, what, 21, 22 years, how many years into?
Yeah, I mean, like calendar wise, I mean, it's like that was like, year 23 or year 24 at the thing. But I mean, like active duty wise, I ended up having 21 and a half years of active duty or 22 years.
So somewhere in there, did you ever notice like, and I know you've read up on operator syndrome and then obviously being involved in the Ibogaine study, like something was off. I would imagine, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but at some point something changed, I'm assuming, just in how you interacted with people, maybe relationships at home, job related issues, sleep issues. Did you notice any of those things or?
Yeah, but it wasn't really apparent until this Ibogaine study thing came up, and I had a buddy of mine who was like, patient number one in the Stanford study, and so I suppose let's switch gears a little and define like what the Stanford study was about. So the Stanford study was a study sponsored by VEX, which is an organization that was formed by Marcus and Amber Capone, and it's a nonprofit, and they fund these treatment trips for veterans, primarily soft guys, that, as far as I know, to go to Mexico to do that because it's not available in the U.S. to do Ibogaine treatment. And we'll get into that, when I'll let you introduce all of that. But that was my experience. Was somebody said that was the first patient in that. He came back and he said how much it changed his life, and he's like, "You should do it." I was thinking to myself, man, I don't think I'm a good candidate for it. And then he said it again, fast forward like another period of time, a couple weeks later, I started thinking about it again. And then he kind of approached it like sideways with it. I mean, he was like, man, you should just go do it. And they treat you really good. They have a chef on staff that have 600 thread count Egyptian sheets. And they treat you like a rock star out there. And it's like, you should go, if nothing else. He goes, what are you doing right now? Just, you should go, at least think about it. He goes, here's the website address. So I go in there and I start rooting around and stuff. And then I start doing all the self-evaluation stuff. And I was just, so this picture I have of myself, it was, not mating up with reality. And the thing is that it wasn't like the obvious indicators. Like a lot of times, people, we know guys in special forces and soft and stuff that have real issues that are easily identifiable, like they're alcoholics or they're smoking an ounce of high grade weed a week, or they're having marital problems, all kinds of behavioral problems, getting in fights downtown, whatever it is, and I wasn't doing any of that. So I wasn't getting in fights. I wasn't, drinking myself under the table or anything like that. So it was really just kind of depression and kind of a failure to thrive scenario for me. And it's kind of hard to define, but it's like, well, if you have somebody that's like, oh man, that dude could run like, sub 5-minute miles, and then he's running, like 6:45 now, and it's like, well, that's still pretty damn fast, But so
it was hard too. That's a really good analogy, man. I think it's a very strong one and easy to understand. People within soft, some of the smartest dudes I know, they're so far ahead that even when they're, having issues, they're still so far ahead, but for them, they're not optimized. And so it sounds like having your friend talk to you like, man, just take a look, and then self-reflection. And then,
yeah. And he obviously had some overview and insight on me, looking at me and like knew me from before and like what's going on now, some comparison and contrast there. And that's probably what brought him to say that. But my ego and, vision of myself wasn't having it at first at all. Not one bit.
yeah,
It's like, no, I don't think I'm a good kid. That was my answer.
yeah. All right. So you chewed on it for a while. You got a flyer.
Yeah, absolutely. So they were looking for, the flyer, this is for the criteria to enter into the Stanford study, was they were looking for soft veterans that had 2 combat tours post 9/11 and had PTSD and or TBI. And then there was some exclusionary stuff, like you couldn't be on any kind of SSRIs, you couldn't be on any kind of painkillers, stuff like that. So there was, couldn't have any active addiction stuff going on.
Gotcha. Okay. So then what'd that look like? Do you just send an email to somebody on the flyer and say something?
Well, yeah, sort of. I mean, I guess that's the first thing. So I filled out something, I sent it, and then somebody called me and said, "Hey, it's what we're looking for." They had a little bit of a mini interview there, and look, okay, sounds like a thing. Here's some more stuff to go fill out. And then there's a bunch of whole road of self-reflection things, and then it takes a while. Then they come back, they go, "Yeah, we think that you're a good candidate for it, and we can get you a grant," is what they call it, because it's expensive, to go down there and do that. There's a cost of the resort that's down there, and then there's all the travel costs that are associated with it. And there's counseling that's integrated into the program. All those things have to be paid for. And they give you a little bit of pocket money while you're traveling around for the Stanford study, because you got to make a couple trips up to Stanford, which is, just outside of San Francisco, San Jose area. So you got to make a couple of trips up there. And yeah, so they give you some spending money to use, a little bit while you're traveling and stuff. But it's kind of funny. You have the flyer. So it says that the flyer says that your total involvement would be about 30 hours. And my total involvement, I think I added it up, was more like 15 or 16 days. And not including the time that I did, where I'm sitting at home and I've got to fill out like a 2-hour questionnaires that you had to do multiple times because they wanted consistency. So you did it, pre-treatment, immediate post-treatment, and then 30 days. And then there was a bunch more battery of stuff that you did like 6 months that is not included as part of the study, I guess. But it was the same round of stuff again at the 6-month mark as well. So it was far in excess of the 30 hours. Yeah, that was just crazy.
Yeah. All right. So I think we could go to the abstract, just so everybody's kind of on the same page. And as a reminder for anybody that doesn't read, studies often or hasn't listened to a previous podcast, the abstract kind of summarizes everything into the snippet. And then the study actually breaks down in different sections. But I'll go ahead and read. So the article is Magnesium Ibogaine Therapy in Veterans with Traumatic Brain Injuries. It was published in Nature Medicine. The link to the DOI, which is essentially how you can find studies per a link, and all the info will be there at the bottom, or in the what is that section underneath the podcast called? In YouTube description. So I think it's the description. Yeah, it'll be in there. So traumatic brain injury is a leading cause of disability. Sequelae can include functional impairments and psychiatric syndromes such as post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety. Special operations forces veterans may be at an elevated risk for these complications, leading some to seek unexplored treatments, alternatives to such as we'll just call it Ibogaine. There's another word in there that I can't describe or pronounce. A plant-derived compound known to interact with multiple neurotransmitter systems that has been studied primarily as a treatment for substance use disorders. Ibogaine has been associated with instances of fatal cardiac arrhythmia, but co-administration of magnesium may mitigate this concern. In the present study, we report a prospective observational study of magnesium ibogaine, the Stanford traumatic injury to the CNS protocol. They term that as MYSTIC. So throughout the study, where it says MYSTIC, is referring to their particular protocol where they're using magnesium ibogaine. And then in 30 male soft veterans with predominantly mild TBI, we assess changes in the World Health Organization disability assessment schedule from baseline to immediate primary outcome and 1 month out. So they did a baseline immediately after, and then 1 month out when they were reviewing the World Health Organization disability assessment. And then additional secondary outcomes included changes to PTSD, depression, and anxiety. The MYSTIC, which is, like I said, it's the program that they used. So having done Ibogaine with magnesium resulted in significant improvements in functioning both immediately and 1 month after in PTSD, depression, and at immediate and 1 month out. Sorry, there's a bunch of numbers in here, so I have to read through those. There were no unexpected or serious adverse events, which is super important to note. Controlled clinical trials to assess safety and efficacy are needed to validate those initial open label findings. Open label meaning that everybody knew that they were getting the drug. There was no placebo. I don't know how you do a placebo with Ibogaine and everything else. Or
it's been, it's like, I've heard, I'm going to borrow somebody else's description of it. It's the Mount Everest of psychedelics. So, I mean, there's no way that you could have a placebo there. You're either getting hitting the head with a sledgehammer when somebody's like lightly tapping you, it's like, what is it,
Yeah, you're not gonna.
Yeah.
So sounds like tremendous results through this. Can you walk us through kind of what it's like to be in a study like this? So you get flown out to.
Okay, so they have this population of people. So that was like kind of touched on that with flyer about you had to have 2 combat tours, post 9/11, and a diagnosis of PTSD and or TBI. So they have everybody's screened, and so all I can talk about really is like my cohort, intelligent. So, I mean, I do know some other people that went through at that time. I know a couple other people that were in the cohort or the 30 that were used for the study, but I can't talk about that. So my cohort was supposed to be 4 people. So, and because this is convoluted about how you're going up to Stanford and then going down to San Diego and then to Mexico and then back up to Stanford and then home and then back. And I'll explain all of that stuff in more detail, but all of that stuff, like you're traveling all over the place. And there's just a lot of people, like I said, I ended up taking, I think I added it all up, like I spent like 15 days. It wasn't just 30 hours to go participate in this. So I could see where people would fall out on it. So in my cohort, there was one guy that completely just fell out of it. So he just couldn't go. Then there was another guy that showed up and was just like not clear communication about it. And he was kind of excluded from it. So we ended up with 2 guys, myself and another guy who was a SEAL. And we went through everything together. So, and it started out, you go up to Stanford, and it was originally set up for 4 people. And so all those stuff, you have to have time, because part of the study was to do an fMRI, a functional MRI. So they have to have the MRI machine blocked out for you for a couple of hours that day, because you got a little bit of load time, and you get in there and then you're actually, the machine is running for an hour and a half plus for the functional MRI, and then offload you and all that stuff. So I imagine like there was like a 2-hour block that they had to block. The psychometric testing is an interview with a neuropsychologist or 2, depending, and that took 6 or 7 hours to do that part of it. And then the other part of it was electroencephalogram. Even though the electroencephalogram only takes like a couple of minutes, it takes them like probably a half hour to an hour to set it up, and to get the harness on you and to get all the electrodes where they're supposed to be. And then when it goes, it's only a couple of minutes, but it just takes a long setup. So those are the 3 main parts of that comprise the data that they wanted, but they also repeated all of this data. So along with the questionnaires that you did on your own. So I guess it's 4 parts of data that you have. So you have your self-paced questionnaires, you have the clinical evaluation by the neuropsychologist in the office, you have the fMRI and the EEG. And this was done 3 times. So to get your group through this, it takes a couple of days, and they planned, because the original plan was to do it like over 4 days. So just the way that the schedule was, so it took 4 days to get everything done. First day was just like a travel day orientation, and then you showed up for your stuff, and then the last day was another travel day to go down to San Diego. So then you go down to San Diego, because it's not legal to do in the U.S. because it's a Schedule 1 drug. We're going across the border to Mexico, and that's where the new OV aspect of it comes in. And that was 5 days there. And then you go through the treatment, and then excluded you from the 5-MeO DMT because they didn't want that to contaminate the study. They just wanted that purely based on the Ibogaine.
So what you're saying, usually they do Ibogaine and DMT as part of the.
Yeah, they usually, I think that their normal protocol would be like they have a 5-day window that this is for soft guys. And so it's like other addiction things, it's different and stuff like that. The only insight I have is for soft guys. So they bring a soft guy down there. It's typically for 5 days. So the first day is like a travel day. They come down there, they go through, there's a bunch of adjunct things that you do. Like you go into a sweat lodge, you go and you get a massage, then you fast, you go through like a fireside ceremony where before the Ibogaine, where you right down to things that you want to get rid of in your life. And it's kind of a significant, powerful experience where you're just take your initial dose of Ibogaine, you wait for it to affect you, but you're down there chatting, you can share or not share, but you're standing around a fire and you have things in your life that you want to go away, that you talk with, and gone through with the counselors and coaches up to that point, your self-reflection, you throw that into the fire. For me, I got rid of a bunch of stuff, and I even, as a significant, thing that in my personal journey is I had a problem with cigarettes. Like my parents smoked. Everybody, when I came to the Army in the 80s, they smoked. And I was going to deployments in Bosnia and Iraq, and everybody smoked. And so I smoked, and then I'd quit smoking, and then I'd smoke, and I'd quit smoking.
Yeah.
So I quit smoking, and I thought at that point I was going to have to go to, I tried everything. I tried Wellbutrin, I tried replacement therapy, I tried Chantix, everything didn't work. Chantix just personal health just made me a really angry person, but nothing worked. And I thought I was going to have to go to electroshock therapy. So that was one of the things on my Ibogaine journey that I wanted to get out of my life. It was, kind of a not lesser important thing, but it is something of note because it's an addiction. And absolutely, threw packed cigarettes in the fire that night, along with my notes of things that I had written down in that ceremony. And then I went through the Ibogaine, and when I woke up the next day, I haven't had a cigarette since. So it's been, 2 years and 7 months since then. So.
Wow. Okay. Oh, with something I think we glanced over, were they doing phone calls and stuff with you before you showed up? Were you doing any kind of prep?
Yeah. So as part of the program, they have a coaching session there. So this is really, really kind of funny about how they define that, right? So yeah, I mean, they're like it's like a therapist role, but it's not, air quote therapy. So this is somebody who has been through the game. They're going to coach you about the experience, and they're going to talk to you. They've had some training about, how to best prepare you for that. Yeah. So, and it really, anybody who's been to any of that mental health stuff, they'll ask you, what's going on? And usually it's the person that you're asking that question to, they'll tell you what's wrong, hey, what's wrong? And then they tell you, they answer the question.
Yeah.
It isn't like you have to go sit on a couch and have some Freudian regressive therapy thing to, work it out. It's find out that it was years of trauma in your childhood that, something happened or whatever. It's usually the person knows. And so it was that kind of stuff like that. It was really basic, about helping, what do you think would do that? What are your goals and that kind of stuff. So they have a program.
Yeah.
So yes, to answer your question, there's a number of sessions that you did there was one session that was in between the 30-day window for the Stanford artificiality of the way that they do the treatment, in between the 30-day follow-up. And then there was a couple of sessions that were post treatment.
Gotcha. Yeah, sorry to throw. So I just wanted to make sure we included that, because I think I remember you mentioning that. And it sounds, Chris, you had gone through the program, and so I was curious if Stanford was kind of following the way that they do it down there. It sounds like a little bit different, because the 5-MeO DMT wasn't included in the Stanford study, at least in the same way.
Yeah, I had a question about that, but yeah, I think the order sounds the same. I think maybe Stanford used what was already in place. I don't know how many SF vets they treated before Stanford did the study, but it sounds like Ambio, the name of the retreat space down there in Mexico, they're using the same protocols at least 2 years later, 2.5 years later. I went
Yeah,
through
absolutely. They had guys that they had treated prior to the study, so they had things set up, and they had their protocol already established. So I think that the Stanford study was just kind of a formality about formalizing it and then defining a few of the parameters. One of the parameters was out of their protocol, their 5-day normal protocol that we do for a soft vet would be on day 4 to include 5-MeO DMT treatment, and they excluded that for my group because they didn't want to contaminate the Ibogaine study.
Did you go back and do it, or have you tried that since?
After the 30-day window.
Okay.
So for our group, that 30, they went back. All of them went back after 30-day follow-up.
Well, I got a question. Since we're talking about the order of the Ambio or the retreat, was there? Could you go into your Ibogaine experience, if you and share what you're comfortable sharing. Um, your individual Ibogaine experience. What was that like?
Yeah, so you threw the cigarettes in the fire.
Yeah. Okay. And that's so I thought, just like topically and everything that I've read about it, it's like what I'm going to touch on this first before I talk about like my individual stuff. So like to me, and this is my own words, like what Ibogaine does for you. So what does Ibogaine do? So again, this is my words, not anybody else's. So I think it gives you like a ghost of Christmas past experience. So you get to review your life. And this is like the hallucinogenic part of it. And a lot of people are very similar and they review things that are problematic, and it's like in a past tense of their life. And then the other thing that it does for you is that it occupies a bunch of receptor sites. So like physiologically, it occupies the morphine receptor sites. It occupies the nicotinic receptor sites, and it interferes and kind of promotes the dopamine cycle. And then the other thing that it does for you is if you've had any kind of injuries, that it promotes glial cell or nerve cell growth in there. And so when you look at, this is the thing that the Stanford study did that doesn't really touch on it, but this is like talking to those guys. So if you look at the MRIs, so it looks like when you look at the slices of the brain, it's kind of like a stack of salami. When they look at that, they pull out the slices of the brain and they see these little white areas that are in them. Those white areas are places that have been damaged. And then they could look at that stuff pre-treatment and then look at it like comparison to the 30 days post, and they could see that there's cellular growth and use in there. So the functional MRI that it's being used now. So that's pretty remarkable, I thought. So it creates new pathways in glial cell growth. It's like number 3. So goes to Christmas past, occupying receptor sites immediately and for quite some time, and then the cellular growth of nerve tissue. So my experience with it was down there. So I kind of touched on this. So it was like the fireside ceremony. So this is on day 2 of the 5 that you're down there. So this is day 2. During the day, you fasted, and you're standing around the fire, and you can share, or you don't have to. You share experiences of things that you want to get rid of out of your life, and you have that written down. So this is the first part of it. You're waiting for the Ibogaine to take effect. So they do a by-weight dose of Ibogaine, and they divide it into 3 separate pills. And then like the first one, I think, is like a lower dose. I'm not sure exactly how they do it, but this is my understanding of it, is that they do it 3 divided doses. Right before you do the fireside ceremony, you take the second dose, and then after the fireside ceremony, then you do the 3rd dose, and then you go up into the room where you're going to be under the effect of Ibogaine, because it's going to catch it. It takes a while for it to take effect. So you're taking the last dose before you even go up there. And the room that they have, that they use for it, it's all set up, and there's a mat there, like a bed, and there's a mirror at the end of it. It's got a couple of candles that are beside it. There's a bucket in case you need to puke, and there's a bottle of water, and there's a gourd type rattle, and they're playing Bowidi tribal music in atmospherically. Weedy tribal music is like anything but music, I thought. It's just, and this goes back to the African roots of the Ibogaine. And so the Ibogaine is an African come of age ceremonial, and there's used for other purposes. I want to touch on that, but that's the roots of it. The guy that runs the people that run that think that it's pretty integral to the ceremony to start that off with the Bowidi tribal music. And so you start off and you're waiting for this stuff to take effect, and you're supposed to be reflecting on your life and the things that you want to deal with. And you're staring at yourself in the mirror, and then, pretty soon you're in the mirror staring back at yourself, and then you're in the reflection looking at the mirror. Then you're in the reflection looking at the reflection, looking into the mirror, looking back at yourself. And then you're in the reflection of the reflection of the reflection, looking back at the mirror, looking back at yourself, so on. So you're heading into those layers. And for me personally, I was sitting there, and they give you some blinders, and I just got tired of looking at it. And there was a couple of things that were going through my mind. And I was just like, man, one is that, they were telling us that you probably feel like you're going to be nauseous. And I was just not feeling that at all. I wasn't nauseous one bit. And I was thinking, man, I'm just fine. And then the other thing that I was thinking about was like, I'm not feeling the effects of this at all. I was like, I think I'm going to ask one of the guys who was there, Trevor, that runs it. I was like, I don't know, I'm asking for another dose, like nothing going on. And then I got tired of looking, going into the layers of the reflection, looking back at myself. And I just said, there was some blinders, like, eye covering, eye mask there. So the eye mask blocks everything out. So I put the eye mask on and I laid down. As soon as I laid down, I probably wasn't there very long. And all of a sudden I just felt like, where is that bucket? And I power puked into the bucket like 3 or 4 times in a row. I mean, just like, like just everything just within a couple of minutes, just one right after the other. And then you're hooked up to an AKG, electrocardiogram. So they're monitoring your heart. There is a doctor, and for my group, there was a doctor and a paramedic behind me, and they're monitoring you to make sure anything's going on. I talked to the doctor later, and said that she had Zofran, which is like an antiemetic, like ready to give me an injection. But she said that I just, I was done with my little power puking incident and set the bucket aside, and that when I laid back down and my heart rate went to like 57 and just stayed there like a metronome. And she said that she didn't feel like I needed it, so she didn't give it to me. And turned out that was right. And then all the thoughts of, oh yeah, that isn't, that drug's not affecting me, like that went away, And then the journey began. And like for me, I was like looking at the fabric eye cover, and all of a sudden I was like, it just seemed like I was magnifying into the fibers of it. And then it was like it turned into like a black stage curtain, and I could see like a Japanese theater mask of like kind of poking through, and it was like a white one and a red one and a blue one. And it was like, and I think what was going on is that I think the doctor and paramedic and staff were like checking on me, and I think that that's what it was. And that's what that symbolized, is if somebody like kind of poking through, is like, hey, is he okay? And then back, but you're just aware of it. 'Cause you're aware, it's weird, like your awareness on Ibogaine. And I guess the term is like proprioception is like where where everything's at. And it's heightened. It's really heightened. And it's like you could see, even though you've got blinders on, you could see your hands moving and stuff. And you're giving yourself that perception that that's what's going on. So this music is playing, and I kept thinking of something like, because the Bowery travel music is like instruments that you haven't seen. And it was like a Star Wars bar scene, where like you just hear all this crazy stuff, and you could hear voices and stuff, and you can't understand anything in the voices because they're talking in whatever language they use in Gabon, and there's no cognates at all. There's nothing in there. Like you listen to some foreign language, like you listen to German or French or something, you can hear some Charlie Brown teacher stuff, and then something will pop out, like automobile or computer or something, there's some cognate that transcends the language. But the stuff there was nothing that was intelligible about that. And I was just getting the impression that it was like open mic night for the Star Wars band series going on there, because they were just talking about like who's going to be playing next. And it was just like some other anti-music cacophony that was going to go, next. And it was really annoying about the music. And so as far as like the vision stuff like that, like I remember seeing portraits of people that were in my life, and it was like this gold plated frame, and it was like a turnstile. Like if you go to, some store like Target or someplace like that, and you go where they sell posters, and you go through the turnstile to look at the posters, and then when you find the poster that you want to hang up in your, teenager bedroom scenario, you go, oh, I want that one. It's an A5, and then you pick out the roll in A5. So it was this turnstile, but it was this really ornate gold frames, and each picture was somebody that I knew in my life, and everybody was fine. And it was just putting these pictures of all these people that were at peace. Nobody was talking to me, but it was just, you had the feeling and you knew that they were at peace. And then the other part of it was like part of a journey. And so I had the vision that I was up in a gondola, like a blimp or something, like the Goodyear blimp or the Hindenburg or something. So I was in this big gondola, and I couldn't tell what was above me, what kind of conveyance it was, but I was in this thing, and it had windows, and I was at really high altitude, like I could see the curve of the earth. And there was a map, and it was in a gold frame, kind of like the picture before, but it flipped from South America. It had like a map of South America, and it flipped as soon as we went out to the ocean to Africa. And then things got interrupted. There's people that are next to you, like the guys that I was in the thing with, that were having issues, and one guy was puking all over the place and pissing on himself, and it was chaos, and there was a lot of stuff that was going on. It kind of interrupted the thing. And at some point, I just said to myself, wow, I don't know. I'm the events leading up to that had like really just wore me out, and I was like really tired. And I just said, well, whatever it's going to do, I don't need to be awake for it, and it's going to do it if I'm awake or not. So I went to sleep. I was talking to the one guy afterwards, and he was, going through his experience, and he was in there slaying dragons and stuff. And he remembered looking over at me and being pissed off because I was snoring. It was just like, that effort is asleep, like, how the hell can he sleep? And he's like going through all this traumatic stuff. It was like, how the heck can he go to sleep, But yeah, and so some of the stuff, like in that experience, another thing was like getting up to go to the bathroom, and you had to have somebody go with you. And from the point to where the room was to the bathroom, it went by this balcony, and you could look down a couple of floors, and it felt like a selection event or something. It was just like to make it all the way over there to the bathroom, and especially to go by that space. I'm not particularly scared of heights or anything, but it was just like, wow. I mean, that just looked dangerous, I was like, going by the railing is just a normal railing, but it's like 2 stories up. You're like looking down at that void down below. It was just scary under the Ibogaine, I guess. And so that was the only time I got up, like under the serious effects of the Ibogaine. And I got up later on, a few hours later, but it was like daylight at that point, and went to the bathroom and came back, and they said, hey, do you want to go back to your room instead of staying up here in the treatment area? And I was like, I go, that's an option? And they said, yeah. So I'm like, yeah, absolutely. I'll go back to those 600 credit count sheets, go take a nap. And so I did. And then the next thing I remember is a guy from the staff, Trevor, woke me up, and he was in the room, and he was like, hey, how you feeling? And would you like to get something to eat? And getting up and eating some bone broth, and, hadn't eaten in like, that was the first thing in like 24 hours, more than 24 hours. And then that kind of triggered things for me. I just had to eat. And at that point, I was just eating, powering down a bunch of stuff. So, the bone broth didn't feel appealing, but I had a little bit of that bone broth, and then that just opened the gateway, I guess, is probably the word. I was really hungry at that point.
So do you think Ibogaine is addictive? Could you see somebody wanting to do this all the time?
Dude, I think that it's anti-addictive. I can't see, maybe, I don't have any experience with like microdosing stuff. And at those heroic doses that we're taking, it's like most people don't want to go back for a second experience. I've known somebody who's gone back like 3 times, or has gone through it 3 times, and each time he was like, he's dreading. He really didn't want to go back the second time. 3rd time, at least he knew what he was up, in for.
Right.
For sure. But like the 2nd time, he was like, absolutely. And I was, no, but he's going to go back because he knows it works.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my experience with it, I would say, to answer your question, I would be like, no, but I got to caveat that, and I don't have any experience with it. I know that in the 50s, it was a prescription drug in France at lower doses. So maybe it could be addictive. I don't really know about that.
Interesting. So with the dosing, that's a very good point, that maybe at a lower dose, it doesn't have as much nausea. People don't generally eat stuff that makes it throw up and feel like crap. And then where you can't walk around or do anything, you're just stuck. But if you microdose, a lot of people are using psilocybin and microdosing.
I have no idea about like what Ibogaine does at microdose level. I have zero visibility on that.
Yeah.
Well, to reference the Joe Rogan, they did mention in the Netherlands, they had that gentleman with Parkinson's, and they microdosed him for 4 weeks. And he was basically, I don't know the particular event, or this story myself. I'm just, hearing it off of Joe Rogan, but they said that he was back. His mom said he was riding a bike now. He's walking.
That's amazing.
And he was bedridden with Parkinson's, like debilitated, completely debilitated. He did an invasive electro brain stimulation. And that helped a little bit to bring back just a little bit of stuff, but he was still bedridden. He did 4 weeks of microdosing Ibogaine. And so, I mean, it's
awesome.
a bit anecdotal. It's a bit anecdotal, but I mean, I think with the movement of Kentucky and now of Texas, but potentially with Perry pushing now, and the data that we've got so far from the Mexico retreats and SF, and it's enough to, again, like that pilot, like the study we did, the first study we did on psilocybin when Johns Hopkins did the study, and to make sure it's safe. And I think that has been the Stanford study, and I went through a trifecta study where we got to do hormone therapy, magnetic resonance therapy prior to going to the retreat, and then we did Ibogaine and 5-MeO DMT, and that was, I mean, for me, life-changing experience. But they're getting this data, behind all of these studies. They're continuing to show the regenerative effects, drastic regenerative effects. I mean, they've got, I think during the Stanford study, they're saying 1.5 year reversal in brain age, and with 5 cases achieving a 5-year reversal of brain age. That's amazing. And it actually renews the myelin. It increases the depth of the myelin around the sheaths. And that's a lot of the problems with like Parkinson's. That's the degradation there is the white matter. And what they're showing is pretty amazing. But with the microdosing, I think that's what they're achieving. And it's not I don't think that it would be addictive even with that, because at true microdosing levels, you're not getting any of the feeling of the drug. It's just there doing its thing. And the longevity effects of Ibogaine, for what is it? I think a month to 4 months after you take the Ibogaine, you still have the peptides and proteins from Ibogaine doing their magic, working their magic within your system. So I think, addiction, I would say, I don't know. I think that's probably something that needs to be studied as well and looked at, and maybe this will open the floodgates a little bit with those types of studies. But anecdotally, I haven't heard anybody that's done microdosing of Ibogaine talk about being addicted. They may be addicted to the effects of it, the positive effects and the continued effects, but not at a detrimental level. I don't think there's any negative effects that have been found with this particular compound.
Well, the one that's unsafe is the QT prolongation.
Right.
Hence, yeah.
With magnesium. Yeah.
Right. So why is it illegal? One of the big reasons is the safety. Just like with MDMA recently and the FDA, safety is why they didn't, push it forward, at least stated by them.
Or was it Nixon?
Yeah. Well, I'm saying push it forward to change the schedule and allow it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically somebody with Torsades point, I'm speaking to you guys. I know you already know, but for our crowd out there, essentially QT prolongation, the ventricle of the heart, the bottom part, it squeezes and it uses up a bunch of electricity. There's a gap in time while the cells are basically moving sodium and potassium and getting ready to beat again. And the farther and farther apart from the squeeze to the getting ready to squeeze again part, the farther and farther apart that gets, the more likely you're going to go into an arrhythmia. That's an abnormal beat. And then it turns into what's called Torsades point. The treatment for is magnesium. And you'll notice that this title of the study here is Magnesium Ibogaine Therapy. So they included magnesium. We don't know exactly what the cocktail was. We had talked about it a little bit, but it's probably like a Myers bag or also known as a banana bag kind of thing. So that was done. And I can't speak to exactly how they did it, but it's included in the treatment to reduce the risk. And per the study, there was no adverse effects. And did you feel at any point that you were unsafe going through this?
No, not at all. So, and to the point, so there's a couple of sessions of like IV therapy, and like the one was prior to the Ibogaine therapy was, like anecdotally I'd recalled it like a banana bag, right? So it's that weird color. And then that was the one that was full of the magnesium. I believe that was the one that had the magnesium.
Yeah. So it kind of preloaded you.
Yeah.
made sure you had all the right nutrients and stuff, and then you got the Ibogaine.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we continue on, and then so I highlighted a handful of things on here. You had brought up some results of the study that were pretty impressive, and in their intro here, it goes into, and this is their words, some studies of Ibogaine for substance use disorder have noted improvements in self-reported measures of mood, but no studies have prospectively validated effects on mood with more rigorous clinician-rated instruments. So this, according to what they're saying here, they haven't really assessed it for PTSD. It's been primarily for substance use disorder, and what this shows is where you have a big change in mood. And to go back to, inclusion, exclusion criteria, as I nerd out on the study itself, they lay out very nicely how many people were screened, how many people were included, and the why, and they laid it out. So 34 people were screened before enrollment, 33 were enrolled into the study, 2 withdrawn, did not meet study entry criteria, and then 1 due to acute substance use withdrawal symptoms. So, we started with 34, ended up with 30. That's still pretty good. I say that's pretty darn good, especially with 15 days of your life. And then we look at the average age was 44.9 plus or minus 7.5 years. So these are seasoned vets, man. This is not young guys. This is, guys with a lot of life experience. And I would say when you're filling out the questionnaires, I would think that being in that age group, you're more likely to answer honestly, because a lot of the stuff's just, it's up to you, right? It's not necessarily
someone's looking over your shoulder.
Right. So you can just be honest with what you're writing, and because data out's only as good as the data in, right? So if guys are putting in, and I think especially in the younger crew, what I see in the clinic is people are more likely to alter, at least from my perspective, what they're saying, the younger you are for whatever reason, because they have some preconceived notion, as opposed to just being.
Yeah, I think that you have a better picture of yourself, and sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It might be a little holdover from the service too. Not wanting to actually tell the truth, because that could impact your career or ability to operate. And we've been taught, or at least maybe not.
Yeah,
taught
there's definitely some truth
to
some truth to that, because I had already been removed from it, and I wasn't trying to keep my security clearance for a government contractor or anything like that at that point.
Yeah.
Got removed from. I still have some government stuff, but it's like far between. My security clearance is not an issue anymore anyway. So
Yeah. See, okay, that's a good point. This is interesting. So the IQ estimate, 2-subset estimate of full scale intelligence quotient. So it was 114 plus or minus 10.3. So very intelligent people across the board of this 30 are included. Combat exposure scale, 29.6 plus or minus 5.2. Number of TBIs, 38.6 plus or minus 52. And as I was reading over this, I'd asked you before last night, like, is that 38 total across the board for all the guys, or is this 38 per individual? And with a 20-year career, lighting, clacking off claymores, arm's length distance, getting shot out of the sky, all the stuff. Yeah. It's like, actually, it probably is 38.6 plus or minus 50 airborne ops. How many hard landings have you had? Charges on doors. You start adding that up over time, 90, counting 90 TBIs. Like, it's almost like, how do you quantify that after a 20-year career, in SF in the 82nd? Like,
it's just a lot. It's just a lot.
That's probably more than 90, I would guess. A couple Carl Gustavs, and everything else. Even just going to like a shoot house school. What name, like you were talking about going to the PJs one, or if you went to Sephardic or Sephowic or whatever, any kind of demo training, all the stuff, it's an add up. So it's quite a bit of exposure, which goes back to our last podcast. We were talking about 85% of SOF veterans in a student status come out of the Q course or, with a TBI, 85%. So then this number here shows us at the end of the road what it really looks like.
Yeah, I think that part of that is probably like the definition and awareness of that, because when it started talking to me, I'm like, I don't have any TBI in my medical records. And then they start, well, what we're looking for, I'm like, oh, that should happen all the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just not anything that I, wrote down. So,
And it's not the big ones, which I think is the misconception, is like, if I haven't been blown up by an IED, I don't have a TBI. Well, that's not the case. It's like, just like with kids football, it's not the guys, it's not the big hits, although they're significant. It's all the little hits that go undiagnosed. All that growing scar tissue, like we talked about, with the shearing of the brain tissue, creating that scar tissue, making it a weaker connection, so that when you do get a chance to get one big one, it's going to be more significant because your brain is not, it's already been damaged. So I think that's worth calling out. Is our nature is to, like Al said, is to discount and be like, I don't think I'm a candidate for this. Like, I'm not an alcoholic. I'm not a drug addict. I'm not destroying my life. I'm not suicidal, all of those things. But why not cut it off early? Like, all of us have been through what we've been through, and the hardest thing you've been through is the hardest thing you've been through. So, like, you got an opportunity, I think, to put out there to the audience is like, if you have an opportunity to go to something like this and do it, go do it in a safe environment. I'm not just saying, just get it on your own or whatever. Joe Rogan goes on the Joe Rogan podcast. They mentioned the two places. There's one in forget the name, Beyond. It's in Quintana Roo, Mexico, and then the obviously Ambio.life, that's in Tijuana, or just outside Tijuana, Rosarita. So those two places are actual places where they're facilitating these medicines, these plant medicines, in a way that is safe. It's by protocol. They have professional medical staff there that's well versed, probably most well versed in the world, as for administration of these type medicines. So be sure to do your research. Don't just go to a place. And I think 5-MeO might be one of the ones, because I've seen a lot of 5-MeO at different church settings in the United States where they're facilitating this stuff. And be sure to take a look at the protocols and the what's the counterindications. So any drugs that you're on that you need to come off at least 7 days prior to partaking in this type of drug, it could be very dangerous and lethal if you're on SSRIs or any type of stuff like that. So if you get the chance, do it, but be careful and do your research and make sure you're not taking any of the contraindicated drugs.
Yeah, and there are case studies of deaths associated. The ones we actually tried looking this up, and I'd say of all the studies or case studies that I found, it was usually associated with 20-year severe alcohol use, different drug abuse,
multi-path addiction. Alcohol, heroin, meth.
Yeah, likely with liver issues, heart issues, and all this other stuff associated. And that's where the screening that you underwent. I mean, how many EKGs did you do before? I think you said you did 2. And then you were monitored during also. So there's a lot of safety protocols that were built into this to prevent it, and ended up not having any major issues. So,
and they did blood draw before. I think, did they do blood draws at Ambio during at the beginning of the retreat before they did any medicine?
So for my group, you had to do an EKG and a blood draw screen before they would finalize your, I guess, entrance into the going to Mexico. Yeah. So then when we arrived in Mexico, so we went up to Stanford, did the first round of testing up there. So the psychometric testing, the fMRI, and the EEG. And then we went down to San Diego, and then we went across the border to Tijuana, to Ambio, or Nuvo V is what they were calling it at the time. I don't know if that's a recent development of Ambio Life Sciences or whatever. But anyways, we were down there. And while we were there, that's the first thing that they did was a blood draw. That was like part of your in-processing kind of thing. So here's your room with the rooms were off the hook again, like 600 thread count sheets. They had the white noise machine, the Himalayan salt lamps, and the scent sticks and everything. They did a really good job with that stuff. And then
so it was Air Force level.
Yeah, absolutely. Even better than Air Force level. I'm saying that was off the hook. And I could get used to that. And yeah, so they did a blood draw and EKG screen for everybody. They went through all your stuff to make sure that you didn't have anything that was, I think that this probably stemmed from like their bread and butter as like a development of that whole thing was prior to the Stanford treatment of this is that they're doing addiction treatment. So,
Yeah.
you have to look at it like that. That sounds like, well, I'm going through my bag. Like they wanted to make sure that you didn't have any.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Make sure that you didn't bring any oxy or whatever it was that was getting issues.
Yeah, and that's what they do in any inpatient facility, the states for all stuff. Make sure you don't have a whatever. Especially if you're giving somebody meds while they're inpatient, they have stuff with them that could cause issues, that kind of stuff. Makes a lot of sense.
But I mean, to answer your question about that, yeah, they did blood test and EKG screen home station, and then again upon arrival to the clinic down there in Mexico.
I think this highlights pretty well if you look at this table on baseline demographics and sample characteristics I've been reading from. But TBI severity, so mild, 28, moderate. These are a number of people in the study, so they'll be included people. So 28 guys had mild TBI. One guy had moderate, one guy had moderately severe. So we're not talking about somebody that severe. These aren't all severe. These are moderate, like to your number with past suicidal ideation, 19. It's over half of the guys had suicidal ideation at some point. Number with past suicide attempts, 7. I wouldn't call this you're talking about soft veterans that and you mentioned this before too, where it's top of their game, like highly achieving or in the invasion, before the invasion occurred, put on the front lines, like high functioning. IQ is just off the chain across the board. We're still having these issues because we have 20 years or beyond of all the traumas, and obviously it has to be linked to the TBIs. That's just me talking, but there's obviously a correlation there. PTSD, 23, PTSD with dissociative symptoms, 6, major depressive disorders, 15 of the guys still have, anxiety disorder, 14, alcohol use disorder, 15, other substance use disorder, 6. Now, this is where finding that cross-section of the population can be a little difficult. We're talking about such a specific group. It's soft, where white is 26, biracial, white Native American is 1, and Native American is 1, and Hispanic is. So, we don't have we don't have a female in there. We don't have other nationalities or ethnicities rather in there. So that does distort, bias the study slightly in terms of safety for across the board, which was another issue during the MDMA trials that we discussed. But we're not talking about a super healthy group of people here in terms of TBIs and mental health going into this thing. But then we look at the results, which are just absolutely tremendous. Now, the primary outcome that they identified, I mentioned it before, was the World Health Organization Disability Assessment Schedule 2, from baseline to post-treatment. So they assessed, like you said, before you guys did the treatment, immediately after, and then a month after, and then to get all the people involved to do these things 3 times. That their primary change they're looking at was cognition, mobility, self-care, getting along, life activity, and it's like practice something. Anyway, it's the 6 realms. And they know that the one that changed the most was cognition, which I thought was interesting. But then in talking to you, your assessment of most of this, except for the cognition, was it was self-identified. Like you fill out a questionnaire. Cognition, it sounds like something where it was actually more of a test.
Yeah, I mean, there was like an objective test where they give you a test and you're observed, and how your accuracy and your time, flat like a little bit. You hear me now? Yeah, we're good. So yeah, so
what kind of tests are they doing for cognition? Just for somebody from the outside, like how'd they assess that?
Well, I guess the questionnaire kind of like not through any of the NFBI or CPI tests, kind of that generic questions like that.
Well, I'm saying cognition specific.
Oh,
that's the
well, those tests. I mean, it's a host of different things, from story problems to static blocks to tracing. That they would do the same. It's a thought confusion, interruption. So like if you have this giant piece of paper and it's got number 1 through 30, and the numbers are all spread out, then you have to go trace it from 1. You have to find the 2, then the 3, then the 4, then the 5, and then they watch you to see if you're making any mistakes in that time. Then The same thing, they have another piece of paper that's nearly identical. Instead of numbers, this one has letters, and you go A, and then you have to find the B, and then the C, and then the D. So you're going in some ordinal fashion.
Yeah.
Then they give you a third one. This is the confusion step. So the time I think was like pretty similar to from the numerical one to the letter. I think it's pretty close, and nothing significant. Then they give you one that has the combination, and they want you to do it in order like 1 to A to 2, 2 to B to 3 to C.
Yeah, I'm already lost.
And so, yeah, your mind is like, it's like, it isn't going
Nightmare.
reflexively because like you're doing the ordinal ones and the letter ones, following the alphabet, you're doing it without even thinking. You're like, zip, 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 zip. But when you have to, you got to find it, you stutter step. So let's say that the first one takes you, whatever amount of time it was, like the first one takes you like 30 seconds to go from the numbered ones and the lettered ones, relatively the same amount of time. The one that you do the interruption takes probably more than twice the time. Like instead of it being, because you have double the number, but it's going to be like, instead of it being like, oh, you think, well, you just overlaid the numbers and the letters on there. So all it's going to be is like, this one took you 30 seconds and that one took you 28 seconds. So it's going to take you about a minute. No, it's like 90 seconds or 2 minutes because that interruption.
Yeah, it's like an extreme short-term memory thing where you get interrupted from 1A, 2, and where was I at? Yeah, I was at A, starting to go to B, kind of thing. And it's remembered one step.
They did some like verbal and visual teaching things where you memorize things and then repeat it back, and some of it like you repeat it back like right away, and other things like to repeat it back. And something that's like complex is like, and you remember like 3 steps the first time, then they repeat it again. Then on your second attempt, you remember 5 steps, and it might take you. They might have to read it to you like 3 times for you to remember all of the steps.
I see.
And so there's that kind of. So it's measuring, your verbal and visual memory skills is what she told me was the clinical the neuropsychologist.
Yeah, well, they noted as the greatest effect size was noted for the cognition domain of that World Health Organization Disability Assessment Schedule.
Okay.
So,
but there's just a variety of tests, and I guess I'm not going over all of them, I guess, but I mean that's like word problems,
yeah,
where you're comparing to, it's just random, like why are you? They're giving you Sally and Jack were salespeople. They sold so many books, and they sold so many of the others sold so many. And what is the percentage of Jack compared to Sally and stuff like that?
Yeah.
So
okay. Another one, and Chris, you brought this up. The Matters SI item was found to be statistically significant. This is essentially suicidal ideation. So after Mystic, suicidal ideation reduction from 47% at baseline to 0 and 7 post-treatment and 1 month follow-up. So at the immediate post-treatment, 0% suicidal ideation, 47. And then at 1 month out, it was still down to 7. So even if it saved one guy's life.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's absolutely tremendous based on just having to go down there, go through.
I agree 100%.
Yeah. Another one, phonemic fluency was high average at baseline and improved to superior range relative to same age peers at 1 month follow-up. So we looked this up last night. Essentially, I say every word that starts with S.
Yes.
So it went from above to like off the charts after doing this. So I think what I read about it was more of a frontal lobe thing that was improved. And so, I'd imagine with TBIs, I can't say without looking at the brain scan stuff, but if you could see new neurogenesis going on in the brain 1 month out, if that's where a lot of the repair is happening, then potentially that's one of the indicators that we can see is going to improve. I don't know how often in your daily life you need to come up with how many words can you say starting with S at a certain time, but it does indicate that there is some improvement in your ability to process that information.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it goes to, like your ability, just, you have that Rolodex of language that's in your brain and you're talking, and it's like how fast that you come up with that stuff. And if you damaged like parts of your brain and you're like going and you're looking for that word, and then all of a sudden you come out with, yeah. So it was the subjugation. That was, that was the word I was looking for. Where that Rolodex is, not using that Rolodex analogy, but like that Rolodex is spinning in your brain until it stops, and then it's like, there it is. There. So it's like that process of however you store the information in your brain was interrupted, and now that's been repaired somewhat. So maybe it's showing that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of huge benefits, I don't know, Chris, did you have anything else? Any other results? I think the Joe Rogan podcast went over quite well and articulately a lot of the benefits and the specifics. So I think it's amazing to be able to have you here to describe what it looked like.
So this helps anybody, make that decision to go apply for a grant, go through vets, and go through this process. I would say absolutely, or whoever it is, wherever they get down there. If they have to pay for it out of pocket, if they have to go, sell lemonade and cookies out in their front yard until they get the money to go down there, that's, whatever it takes.
Yeah.
How much is your mental health and spiritual health and emotional health worth?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's, I think, the average cost, I think, is between $5,000 and $7,000 for a retreat, a 5-day retreat. At the, speaking of the quality of the retreat and the quality of the care and the comfort there and how well they take care of you, the environment they create, it's second to none, in my opinion. My brother actually just went through last week, and he was a pilot, a dust-off pilot. So they're doing grants, and they're providing support for non-SF now. You just got to call or go to the website and apply and see what happens, and be willing to take some of the burden, if not all of the burden, because if you go through vets, you get a discount on on the price of the retreat. And that alone is going to be a savings of, $2,000 to $3,000 off what you'd pay just to go through Ambio. So, if you're a vet, SF vet or anything, pilot, when I went through with the study, I went through with a jet pilot, and he ejected, and had some pretty significant injuries. And, this is his second time to go through, and he paid for himself to come back and go through. So yeah, it's life-changing. And it's worth it, to do this type of treatment and medicine and community that you get to add yourself to as a result. I also think that, I can't say enough about it. I wanted to ask, Al, you said you did 5-MeO after the retreat. What was your 5-MeO experience?
I did. So let's qualify that. So I think the norm for that is, we're talking about the kind of the regimen or the protocol that they have for, at least for the soft veterans that come down there. It's usually a 5-day window, and you end up doing the Ibogaine on day 2. And then there's a lot of adjunctive therapy, things that you do. Like on day 1, you go to a sweat lodge and go get a massage. You get some training on, meditation and all that kind of stuff that goes along with that. And then on so the Ibogaine lasts on day 2 and 3, and then on day 4, you are doing the 5-MeO DMT treatment. And I think that they look at it as like an adjunctive part of this, and it's a really good finish to that week. And then Friday is kind of a finish up, the day 5 part of it, and then they end up traveling back on day 5. So that's the usual 5-day thing. So for us, the guys that were in the Stanford study, they didn't want the 5-MeO to interfere with or contaminate or affect in any way, shape, or form the Ibogaine part of the study. So instead of doing it that week, what they did was they said, okay, after you have done your 3rd round of psychometric fMRI and EEG evaluations, then you can go do the 5-MeO DMT, the adjunctive part of the therapy. So for us, the cohort that started out at 4 and ended up being 2, we were the same guys. We met up in Stanford. We did our 30-day follow-up post-treatment, and it was actually a little bit longer than 30 days. I think it ended up being, because they want you there at the same time, so we kind of coordinated everything. So I think for us in that part of it, it was like at about the 5-week point, so 35 days post-treatment, or give or take a couple of days. And then we went down to Mexico, and it was for a shorter amount of time. So we were just there for a couple of days. So we went down there. We had a day integration with that. I think that we did some meditation, massage, had some great food, and then the next day we did the 5-MeO DMT ceremony. And for me, you want me to describe that, or
yeah, whatever you're comfortable with? Absolutely, yeah, please.
Okay, so and this for me, it was like nice and sunny, and it was like you're out they're out on their lawn, and you're like facing the ocean. You got the ocean breeze like in your face, and they've got some nice, kind of meditation music as opposed to the weedy travel stuff, the anti-music acne stuff. We should play like a little bit of that just to know what the heck it is. It's just like it is.
I'll see if I can squeeze it in.
Yeah. So at any rate, so it was just some nice meditation music and everything. It was like calm and relaxing. And so they have it. They give you a dose of it, and it's called handshake dose, and just to make sure that you're kind of tolerant of it. And we were doing it in the crack pipe form, so it was an actual pipe that you heat up with a blowtorch. I call it a crack pipe, but I'm not being, dismissive or anything. But I mean, it was a glass pipe, and you heated it up with a little butane blowtorch.
Gotcha.
So the first one is just like a little handshake dose. They go through the procedure of it. So you take it, you inhale it, you have blinders on, and then there's somebody there that's kind of guiding you. You're just kind of sitting up on, like a saddle blanket that's out on the lawn. It's a nice breeze. It's perfect temperature. And you just kind of lay back, and they kind of lay you back. They kind of guide you back as they're doing a backwards count to you, and then you lay down, and so the first handshake dose doesn't really do anything to you. I mean, it makes you feel a little bit light or something. It didn't really do anything. And then you sit up and you make sure that you're okay. And then you do another dose, like a full dose though. This time, this isn't just a handshake dose. It's supposed to be the full dose. And for some people, it's enough. And then you go through the same procedure, because the first part was just a practice. You go through all of that, and they lay you back. And then for me, I was sitting there thinking, I was like, man, it just, it made my arms feel like really light and everything. And it just kind of gave me a headache, but I was just like, man, it was like really gave me kind of like a really bad feeling about it. Like, didn't want to do it. And I was just thinking to myself, man, I had just gone through like, weeks of stuff, to get to this point. And I was just like, give me another dose, because we could do another dose. And I was just like, it didn't do anything. I'm just thinking to myself, it didn't really do anything for me. I was like, give me another dose. So he give you the third hit on it. Then that one like sent me, and to me, it was like I was like everywhere and nowhere at once. I was like, it felt like, I mean, everybody has a different way to describe it, right? And so I felt like if you're in a short power boat doing like 100 miles an hour and you're just banging on the waves and you're just hauling ass, and then you just chop the throttle, and it just felt like that, that you're in a boat that just lost power. You're like, what? It just like threw me forward, and all the lights were coming at me. Like it reminded me of that, one of those Star Trek episodes, where they go at warp 10, where you're like everywhere and nowhere at once, was what they described it. And that's what I thought. That was the first thing that came to mind. Like it was everywhere and nowhere at once. And I felt like I had a connection to the universe. I reached out and I put my hands into the lawn, and I was digging my fingers into the roots of the grass. I wanted a connection with the earth, and I felt like I knew the answer to a lot of questions that were in the back of my head, so like I knew why I was spearfishing one day, and I gave the sea lion, like underwater, I gave him one of my fish, and I knew why I did that. So it's just a stupid question, like, like I wasn't asking that, but for some reason that came up, there was a bunch of things. I mean, maybe because we're like looking out at the ocean and stuff, it just felt like there was a lot of things that were connected to the ocean at that point. But it was a good experience, and I didn't have anything negative about it at all, zero. And other than like at the after the second dose, I was at the decision point where I was just like, oh hell no, like I don't really want to go through this. And then something just said, man, you've done all of this stuff, just go do that last and final dose. And then that's the one that sent me and had me have that experience. And it definitely floods you and you feel really good. I think that you like super happy, like almost, to the point of tears. Some people do. I mean, I wasn't there, but but some people, they're, they are. I was really happy, and yeah, that was my experience with it. So it was pretty good. I think that the lasting effect of that was like after you recover from that, I think a little bit later, like it supercharges you, but it takes a bit of time before that happens. You have to recover from it, I think, a little bit, and before that supercharger kicks in, that where it's flooding you, I think when it's flooding you with serotonin and stuff, and just makes you pretty happy. But that lasts for a while, and it takes a bit of time to build up and for you to become aware of it. And I think everybody's a little bit different, but for me, it was the next day and a few days after that, and I just felt like I was really good place, and it definitely helped. So it dovetailed really nicely into that post Ibogaine treatment, or that period of time of what you're talking about, where it's still lasting. So it dovetailed really well into that, I think. And I don't have anything else to compare it against. I can't tell you, whether you do it, within the same week, like the typical treatment regimen that they do the Ibogaine on day 2 and 3, and then on day 4 you do the 5-MeO, whether that's a better regimen than the way that I did it, where I did it, that treatment, and then I came back 36 days later and did it. I can't tell you which one's better. I did talk to the guy that runs things down there about it. I had specifically had that conversation with him, and he thought that it's maybe slightly better, but it's also just not practical, to bring people back like that. If we didn't have the artificiality of the Stanford study that could not be contaminated, it could not be affected by, they didn't want it to be any part of it. If we didn't have that removal in time, then it wouldn't have been done that way for us. So
Yeah.
maybe it's just a pleasant observation, and I don't know if that really answers your question very well, and I don't know if I'm capable of answering it, but I mean, all I can do is give you, my experience. And I did have that conversation with Trevor about it specifically, and I had a couple of conversations with him about it. And the other thing that I had a question about was to do like guided Ibogaine therapy was my thing. So that was my question that I wanted to know, was that, so a lot of people go there for specific reasons, and they have their own, and they're unique to each individual, and they have things that they want to deal with, like it's, PTSD or trauma related or whatever it is that's going on in their life. And if you have those things, let's say on a list, and you had a proctor or a mentor that's there, that's not going through the Ibogaine, but is there, and they can tap you on the head and say, while you're under the Ibogaine and you're in that influence and you're in that first, part of that where it's that major phase, and say, remember, you wanted to talk about this and you wanted to deal with this stuff. And so just to remind, as a general reminder. And I think that in the traditional Gabon ceremony, they do that kind of stuff, and I'm not sure, like he said that this is a conversation I'm having with Trevor, the guy that runs things down there. And I think that, he definitely thought that it was valid, but he also, at the same time, he thought, it's just something to think about. And I think that it's the practicality of it.
It makes a lot of sense to me. Johns Hopkins, for psilocybin, they have a playlist of music. Depending on the type of music that you play, it activates different centers. And so they have a playlist that's supposed to, as my understanding, that's supposed to activate these different parts of the brain based on the music type. Well, if you had somebody standing over you and saying, hey, remember this thing, so unlock that memory.
Touching on the music thing, so we'll revisit that a little bit. So they started out playing this Bawiti tribal music. And at some point, they figured it was like about the halfway point of your hallucinatory phase of the Ibogaine. They switched the music to like meditation, like waves and whales and that kind of stuff. It's like more calming, and it's, it's like non-disruptive music or anti-music or whatever you want to call it. That Bowie stuff. The Star Wars band.
Yeah, it sounds like you have quite the personal relationship with the Bowie music.
Yeah,
I'll have to find some, throw it on for people.
Yeah. So I don't know why I keep referring back to it, but like to me that stood out. The Bowie tribal music was like that stuff was anything but music. And it played in my, part of my journey there. I, had that vision of like, kind of the Star Wars bar scene where all these people are standing there with these weird, non-standard instruments, and they're all just like chatting about like who's going to be up next in the open mic night. That's what I was, visualizing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, you got anything else, Chris?
I just did what you just mentioned about the Bowery music. I thought it annoying as well as it really fit well with my experience. I had like very intense auditory hallucinations during mine. Like I could hear, I guess my subconscious was just dumping everything I've heard for my whole life is the way I kind of think of it. And when I laid back at first and the Bowery music's going, I got off my maraca, laid back, and felt the medicine kind of wrap around me and take me into its start its process. I saw like a silk black sheet over the top of me, over my entire vision, over my body. And then I saw, I guess, as a result of the Bowery music, and I think it ties in, so your story made me think of it, is that there were little African boys and girls, I guess, I couldn't tell what they were, but I could just see their heads and their bodies in a silhouette, like backlit onto this black silk cover, and they were beating on it. And I could see them, and it was almost, the Bowery music doesn't really have a rhythm, but they were kind of doing it with the rhythm of the Bowery music. And I was like, okay, here we go. Like, this is it, and I didn't know what to expect either. But yeah, your story reminded me that the Bowery music did guide me towards kind of their ceremonial look and feel within my experience. So it did influence a little bit. And then I went into my own, everything that the medicine was going to show me specifically. But yeah, it was, my brother came back and he was like, hey, I'm listening to the Bowery music. Like he was going to the airport. I got it on my playlist. So like, that was random. And actually afterwards, when I sweat, sometimes I'll turn it on, the Bowery music, just to bring me back to the Ibogaine kind of experience. I do sweat sometimes.
I guess there is something to that, maybe it's kind of I don't know. I don't want to bring up that guy's name, but it's like a Dianetics association of stuff, it's like there's,
Something I did want to bring up, we have no financial affiliation with Ambio or any of the other treatment sites. So there's been a lot of positive talk here, and I think it's even more powerful because it's coming from a place, it's within you.
I got some free coffee up.
Yeah, you did get free coffee, not from Ambio, but yeah, we have no affiliation with especially financially with them. I think the goal here is to really reach out and get guys help and at least open up their eyes to the opportunity in front of them. If, even if you don't think you need it, maybe something you heard here today kind of resonates, and then you can go to Vet's website.
100%. And I'm going to say that again, that when it was presented to me, and the first thought in my head was, I'm not a good candidate. So I started, self-reflecting and looking at things, and went down the road a little bit more. And but at first that was my knee-jerk reaction. I was like, I'm not a good candidate. So, and it may, if you're out there looking at somebody, you're putting them in the, trying to put them on the path to this, or in your target index for it, like they're the person that you're going to try to influence to go do this, or mention it to however you want to look at it, then that would be the thing. It's like to just urge them to take a look at it, because that's what it took to me. It was to get me across that threshold was that, like you said, well, just take a look at it. There's no consequence to looking at it, and they have, it's like better than the Air Force. They treat you better than the Air Force down there. They got 600 cup seat. They got a chef on staff, and they treat you really good. And the food is off the hook, and it's, everything. It's like the white noise machine to the Himalayan salt lamp to the, everything. So 100%. If this moves even one person down the road to recovery, then it's worth it. Well, hopefully it will be much more than just one.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you, Al.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was my pleasure.
And opening up and sharing.
Enjoyed your story.
And thank you for your service, dude. I mean, as a couple of vets here who've been doing it a long time too, dude, look, you got quite the You were in it a long time. I mean, you went to SF before there was selection. I don't know too many. I haven't met too many guys in that realm. You know, you were a standard bearer 4. We had some conversations about some of the stuff that you had to endure and deal with and shape the force. And then you worked at SWIC for a number of years.
Yep.
You know, just a really tremendous career. So appreciate all the work that you did over the years, working at refugee camps and everything else, man. It's amazing. So thank you so much for coming. For real, dude.
Absolutely.
And then make sure you like, share, subscribe, keep this thing going, and really to help. You know, you don't know if that next share is gonna open somebody's eyes to the stuff that Al and Chris were able to share with us today. And then also thank you to everybody involved with the study. It's to get 30 guys together for all the days and hours, the resources required, the people that came together, got the money together for the magnesium ibogaine therapy in veterans with traumatic brain injuries. And I'm going to read off the names of the authors here because I think that's right. So Chris, and excuse me if I mispronounced your name, but Chris, you actually know some of these people, don't you? You can meet them.
The first one, Kirsten Cherian.
There we go. Okay.
Absolutely.
Actually, you probably know these better than I do since you met them. I'm going to mess their names up.
Well, I didn't meet everybody that's on here, but I met, I think I know 6 of the name authors that are on here yet.
All right. Well, I'll give it a shot. So Kristen Cherian, Jacob Kenyon, Lauren Anker, Afik Fairman, Randy Brown, Ashmid Shama, Or Kanan, John Cotes, Jean-Marie Battelle, Angela Phillips, Nicholas Bassano, Gregory Solemn, Jose Inzuenza, Trevor Miller, we know him. You mentioned him earlier. Jonathan Dickinson, C.E. Roll, Jennifer Keller, Maheen Adamson, Ian Crater, Nolan R. Williams.
Yep. So the people on here that I had individual contact with, and Kirsten, Randy, Trevor, Jonathan, and Nolan for sure. And there's another guy that I'm not. He did an interview there. I think it was.
Yeah. So thank you to everybody that put the time and effort. I mean, you guys obviously you're moving the needle and getting guys and gals what they need to thrive. You know, like you said, you're so far ahead. Even if you fall off a little bit, you know, you got a little boost. So would you say it was worth it?
100%.
Right on.
Yeah.
That's
100%
definitive. All right, Chris. Well, thank you for your time. I know you gotta bounce, and we'll see everybody out there on the next one.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. Thank you. Appreciate it. And we'll see you next time.
Absolutely.